Hello, everyone. So today we'll be talking about Project Sneaky Sneaky. Uh, there are the instructions right here which detail all the requirements, but we'll be taking a look at that a little bit more today. So for the Sneaky Sneaky, we're basically putting everything together that we've done for the past couple of weeks and making it into a game type scenario. So we'll be using our NPCs to move around and actually, or our AI entities, we're going to be referring to those as guards. Don't worry about the naming convention of it so much because they are just nav agents that we've set up from before. One note about this, when you are starting the project, you can build straight off of your previous assignment. So you can reuse anything we've built up to this point in this assignment. There is this click for a link to a NavMesh tutorial basics to show some player click to navigate, but we'll also be walking through that today in today's session. Additional resources, always helpful to brush up on a couple of the basics if you need a refresher. And basically, we're going to be putting together a playable version of what we've been building up to all this time, rather than just having our agents move around and just being able to tell them to switch states. We're going to see how they can interact with a player. You will actually be delivering a package for this assignment, so it's not just a screenshot assignment. You will actually be submitting everything, including all your code, the scenes, everything that makes up this assignment. As far as implementation goes, this describes what needs to happen for the different interactions the player can do for the game. Left and right arrow keys can select which guard you want to have set up. In the last session, I showed how to do the left arrow key. In the documents, it walks you through how to do the right arrow keys to select an active guard. And pressing these different 3 commands, 1, 2, or 3, will be triggering some debug things to swap them to different states. Pressing 1 is going to be doing the pause state. We saw how to set that up with just the spacebar. Just got to make sure to switch that to the 1 key. 2 will actually change the way they're traversing the states. It'll trigger it so that it switches to a reverse and modifies our patrol, so rather than incrementing, it should decrement through the different nav points. You don't necessarily need an entire new state for this. You can just have it as a modifier, like, am I currently reversing? Then I'll want to be the specific colors, which are mentioned down here. And blue is going to be for the reverse state. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. Pressing 3 should tell the current guard to go to an angry state. Basically, this is more similar to a distract, where if you press 3, they'll go to a specific node that you've placed in the scene, an alarm node, and they'll touch that node and then just return back to its normal patrol as normal after it's touched that thing. Then down here is describing the different colors that it should be using to represent each state. So forward patrol will be green, reverse patrol will be blue. It describes which prefabs need to exist and everything in here, and some notes about how to turn things in and just a couple of good practices for that. So let's take a look at the feature sheet. You will need to download this feature sheet and open it up in Excel. And as you're going, we're going to just enable edit, and you're completing these different tasks. You're going to want to put an X to say completed for the ones you've done. If you were pretty close on a task, but it's not fully functioning, go ahead and mark it completed. And then over on the right, you can add any specific notes that you'd want us to take into account for grading. For example, if something's not quite working correctly, well, It's hard to have a prefab not working correctly. It's either there or it isn't. But let's say you couldn't quite get reverse and it only reverses to its current, to the previous nav point. It doesn't continue reversing after that, only reverses once, doesn't keep going in reverse. Or if you had trouble getting it to change to the right color or change color at all, make sure to add a note about that here in this explanation section. You don't need to add notes to everything that you've completed if it's exactly as instructed in the document or completes that task entirely. You can just leave the X there and explanation blank. Today we'll be looking at how to get the player to navigate to a specific position, but before that, let's take a look at a complete version of Sneaky Sneaky. So we took a brief look at this at the very beginning of the class, just to show what we're gonna be building up to towards the end. And here I can click play, and we can move our character around by clicking on a point, and it'll move that our player character around, or player avatar. And I'm able to press the right or left arrows to select either the next agent or the previous agent from our agents array. I have this one selected right now, and if I tell it 1, it'll pause, tell it 1 again, and it'll turn that pause off. We see it's just going through the nav points as normal. It just touched that nav point, and if I press 2, it immediately triggers a reverse. So not only does it tell it to start reversing, but it also tells it update your new position and set a destination for our previous point. So reverse will actually reverse through these different patrol points the opposite direction as normal patrol would. This is a toggle, so if we just press 2 again, it just starts going through them as normal. If we press 3, it'll trigger what is referred to as the angry state. And the angry state will require a new item to be placed in the level, or new point, some sort of game object inside each one of the rooms that is basically our distract point. Imagine this as being like your player has some sort of hacking ability and can hack a terminal, and so the guard has to go investigate what's happening with that terminal and turn that alarm off. Once they take care of that, they just go back to their normal patrol routes. The very last element to this is going to be a pursue state, where if we get within a certain range or our guards can see us, they'll start chasing after our character. We'll talk more about that one on Monday. As far as the distraction state, if you take a look back at a session we did about 3 sessions ago, is just nav agents with a nav agents with a state machine. I did actually add a specific state that wasn't just pause, because the documents show you how to do the pause. The state I added was some sort of distraction state. So it got it off of its normal patrol route, went to a specific point, and then returned back to normal. So please use that one for reference for the angry state. And then our actual game part to this is, well, if we have some guards, we're trying to get our player to some sort of endpoint. You will need to have 4 separate rooms, at least 4 areas. You can have more if you want, but I will only be checking 4 different areas. So something you're going to need to think about is the camera setup. We saw that this one was set up as soon as I hit an invisible trigger right here, it moved the camera over, and we're able to still actually keep playing, clicking around, and getting our player to navigate through. And we'll just navigate completely through. From a player perspective, I'd wait for this guard to pass, or even trigger it to, which I can't select that guard. No, didn't add that one to the list. But we'll just run past him since I know I've tweaked it so that my character is a little bit faster than all the guards, just about as fast as those guards. Let them get stuck on the wall. And there should be some sort of end goal where your player can get to, and then it lets you know that you've escaped. So a couple of things we're going to be talking about today is getting our player set up and moving around when we click on a point, along with interacting with a trigger and things like that. Richard, you had a question?
So would this be like some kind of still an incomplete game as well, since apparently you aren't able to switch between patrols in each room?
Yes. So there was a little bit of a glitch where I have several different guard managers for if it's guards on the right or guards on the left, and I only added 2 guards from the right and 2 guards from the left. Ideally, I would have 2 more guard managers and have them for the upper rooms as well. Or I could just add those other guards here. Let's see, how many guards are there? There's 1. Let's just add all of these guards to our guard manager. I'm going to just get rid of the separate guard manager and just have 1 for the entire game. And there's about 8. As far as which ones we want, I'm going to try this method to assign them. No. And we'll actually lock our inspector so it stays on this while we're clicking these other objects. And oh, that's annoying. Got to do them one at a time.
Couldn't you use the circle to make it a little bit more faster instead of just click and drag?
It would still require me to click here and then click here, and so it's just about the same thing. I would also recommend naming your guards something different, so because I can't tell which guard this one is. They're actually both the same, so
I
this
got the
guard
sudden
will
urge.
go there.
I suddenly got the sudden urge to name each guard an actual name, like Larry or something.
That's totally up to you. You can totally do that.
I also get that idea.
Yep. I
guess
mean,
that would
guard
be
right
a
and
fun
guard up, they're slightly more descriptive than just game object or guard, but
like Billy, Mo,
yeah.
Smith.
Feel free to have fun with however you set up the level. The organization on that note, like the room size and everything, or if they're just laid out in a quad pattern like this, it's totally up to you how you lay out your rooms and everything like that. At a minimum, there has to be at least 2 guards in each one of the different areas. I do kind of like how they added just different colors representing the different rooms, so it's real easy to see which room is which, and there are 4 distinct areas. The guards should stay in just their own room, unless you get them all following the player and chasing the player the entire way out. I do highly recommend balancing it so that your player character is a little bit faster, just so that it's not ridiculously hard to try and try and get away from the guards. So as you notice, these guards are going different speeds. You have full control over what those speeds are, and I have this still locked. But unlocked, and we'll select one of these guards and come on. And I can't even get away from this guard right here. But if we were to tweak its speed, let's say it only moves a speed of 1. Now, I can actually get away from that guard. So you can change those, and they are per instance of what you put in the level. So keep that in mind. You could create like a speedy guard, a slow guard, even different size guards if you really want to get into it, and have some fun with the game design. Biggest priority here, though, is we're looking for all those state changes and the functionality to work first. All right, so that's the general idea. Let's jump over to our previous project that we have from last session. Just a note, I do have this editor set up as a dark editor. That's something that Unity just released for their free editor versions. If you want to know where that is, it's under Edit, Preferences, and switching the theme to Professional. So they just did that about 6 days ago, and I've been waiting for that one for a couple of years. So quite happy they finally released it free. All right, so here we just have our nav agents with a manager all set up from our last session. We can press our left arrow to select one of the guards and issue it the stop command with space. And we can tell them all individually when those things need to happen. Okay, let's take a look at adding a player character and getting it moving around the screen and interacting with a couple of things. For that, we'll need a game object for our player. And before I do that, we will be complicating this scene a little bit. I'm going to just create an empty object. We're going to organize this a little bit better, so this is considered like room 1, just so keeping things a little bit organized. Room 1. I want our nav agents. We'll even create different terrains for the different rooms. Our camera can go in between the rooms. I don't want that in the specific room, but we'll select everything that would be in just this room 1. Put it in there. Our agent manager, we only really need one agent manager for the entire level. You could do it like how this one was set up initially with the multiple guard managers, one for each room. It's up to you what method you'd like best. Just keep in mind you have to remember to add any new agents to the agent manager so you can select them. All right, so we have room 1. Let's go ahead and create another empty object, and we'll call this agents. And we'll just move our 3 agents into there. We'll create another one for nav points. And we'll move our 4 nav points in there. And we'll create our last one for level geometry, things like the floor or any walls or ramps or anything that we create. We'll keep that in its own separate thing. And I notice our nav points, we want that to keep that room based. So we'll put that in room 1. We'll add one more, create another, and this will be our level geo. And hopefully I didn't screw anything up. I was typing level geo before. Well, let's see. We'll just move all our level geometry into that folder. So we have a very clear, easy way to filter our different objects, or if we need to change something, we know right where it is in our hierarchy. All right, so room 1's now all contained in that. So when we have our separate rooms, we can quickly organize that. Next up, I'm going to need a player. Our player won't necessarily be tied to a specific room, so I'll create it at the global level here. Create another one. We'll call this player. I'm going to add a few different things to get our player to move around, and rather than empty, we might as well just go from one of the 3D objects, so it comes with a few things. I usually use the capsules to represent characters so that they have the nice rounded edge and can go over little bumps and things like that. I'm gonna scale this up a bit since our other characters are pretty big in here. We'll just go by a scale of 2. Oh, not 25. And 2. And then drop it down to 1. And just double check to make sure it is clipping through the floor. 2 would make more sense since we scaled it by 2. We need to choose where our character is going to start out. Let's start it over in this left corner here. Rename it from capsule to player since we recreated that character again. Then we'll need to add a nav mesh component as well as some sort of script to it. So let's add a new script. I want to try and keep all of our scripts in one folder. So we may need to reorganize our assets folder. Let's go ahead and create a subfolder right in assets. We'll call it our last name, first name, or just maybe even first initial followed by last name. Keep it a little bit shorter. I'm going to put everything that we need to run this game itself inside that folder. Visual Studio detected the change because the scripts moved. Our game dev example scripts was provided from when we imported our experiment 0. We don't need that in here. I'm going to just get rid of that for now. Visual Studio letting me know that it's updated. We do need our materials. Our nav agents has their own stuff in it. Let's just move our materials into our named folder. And scenes is just the sample scene that came with the project when I created it new. I don't need that scene anymore. So we can get rid of that one. As far as how our folder's looking, we have our FSGDN provided state machine. We can keep that out. We'll go ahead and add our prefabs folder to our named folder and our scenes folder to our named folder as well. Last thing, we want our scripts under our name since we'll be building new scripts as well as having the quick access right here is nice. All right. Next up, our terrain object. Well, we need a terrain for our level, so I might as well drop that in our named folder as well. And we can get rid of this nav agents folder that came with the package, just getting our nav agents moving around. Yes, sir, what's up?
Don't we also need to rename this scene to
Yes.
last name, first name?
Yes, the scene has to be named your last name, first name. So we can go ahead and rename the scene. File save, and for the scenes, we have our scene here. It's just named navmesh, not great. We need to have that Murphy underscore first name underscore sneaky.
Is it underscore sneaky or just sneaky?
Doesn't matter if there's an underscore there or not. Not going to get that picky about the name of the scene as long as I can see which scene is your sneaky game in. So if you do have multiple scenes in there, it can be kind of a pain to have to search for a bunch of different folders or things like that for a specific scene file. So as long as it's got your name and sneaky, whether you put first name first, that's up to you. as long as it does have your name attached to it and sneaky sneaky. All right. Now that we have all this set up, we're going to want to add our player script. So not in scenes, but scripts would be where our scripts go. So in scripts, we're going to create a new script. We'll just call it player. We can open that player up. And we need to get this moving around using a nav mesh component or nav mesh agent component. So if we want to use the AI to move this, we do need that using directive. So we'll type that out first so we don't have any issues when we go to use those components. Next up, I'm going to tell it that this class needs a nav mesh agent component. So we can use that required component. And the component we're requiring is type of a nav mesh agent. So now anytime I go to attach this script, it'll add that component if it doesn't already have it, or it will prevent me from ever removing our nav mesh agent component from something that has this player script attached. Just a very nice way to prevent any issues of, well, my script's not working. Well, if you don't have that component, then you can't get that component. So force it to tell the editor to require it. Let's go ahead and create a class variable for our nav mesh agent. And we'll just call it nav for short. Initialize it to null by default, and then in start, actually get that component once our game object's been initialized. We'll set our nav equal to get component. Type of component, that's our nav mesh agent component. All right. Next up, that's just getting us access to that component and storing it in a variable for easy use, so we don't have to call get component every time we need to reference it. We then need to use that nav component to set a destination for our character. We only want that to happen if we've clicked. So if our input get key down, key code, mouse 0 is our left or primary mouse button. When we click, we need to find out where we clicked on the screen. So in order to do this, I'm going to do what is called a raycast. You guys should be somewhat familiar with those from other classes. And for the raycast, that's under our physics namespace. So we'll do physics.raycast. Raycast here has 16 different overloads. There's 16 types of raycast functions we can call. One that just takes an array and returns a bool, so that would let you know if it did hit anything. That's not a lot of information. Our next one can take an array and a certain amount of distance that you'll shoot. Not great. This one is taking an array and actually has an output parameter that it'll fill out with hit information. Things like where it hit, what object it hit, very useful stuff. It also has a bool letting us know if it did hit anything. So if this is returning a bool, I'm going to wrap this in an if. And we know with the raycast, we need some sort of ray to put in there. Well, our ray will be based off our mouse position. We can create a ray, and array is a type of structure, just like our vectors and things like that, or transforms. It just holds many different variables all in one. Really just two variables here, or well, three variables, origin and direction. Sorry, two variables, yeah. Mouse ray equals, we have to ask our input for our mouse position. And that gives us coordinates on the screen where we clicked. We can then ask our camera to convert these to world coordinates. So we'll ask camera, and we'll go off of, I don't even think we need to go off anything. No, we do. We'll go off the main camera. Screen point to ray. So it basically takes in a vector of where that mouse is, converts it to actual world coordinates so we can do collision detection on that world ray. Oh, looks like internet connection's unstable. No. So this will give us our ray. If we type in, or if we pass that to our raycast, we then wanted that hit info back from our raycast. So we need to create a structure for it to fill out. It is of type hit info or raycast hit. And we'll just call it hit using the suggested name there. We can then pass this in as an output parameter. Whenever you want to get something out as a parameter, you have to specify the out keyword. So what that's doing is we're passing this empty structure into the raycast as a reference so that as the raycast function runs, if it detects a hit, it can actually fill out information into our hit variable right here. We can then use that information in here if hit dot, and we can check a lot of different things. How far was the distance? What collider did it actually hit? What the specific transform of that hit is. Well, we can then tell our character to move or set a destination for it using our nav mesh agent component. We can set a destination, and we can specify where we want it to move. What vector 3 do we want it to move to? Well, we want it to move to our hit transform, and actually there's a hit point, which is a little bit shorter than typing transform.position. So hit point, impact point where it actually hit a collider. Let's test this out. I want our player to have our player script attached. We'll go ahead and attach that. And we see it added a nav mesh agent component. I didn't add that one manually, but because the script requires it, it won't let us remove that component or anything like that. I do want my character to move a bit faster than the other characters, so we'll just double that speed. I don't know if these, what are these, just 3.5? Yeah, so our player character, let's make it move a little bit faster with 7. If we go ahead and play this, and we try clicking around, well, click, click, we've got our character moving. Let's make sure it is navigating. I'm going to click on this opposite side. It's going to go around that wall and go to the point we clicked. All right. Now, let's make sure that our character can interact with something. So at the end, when it hits some sort of trigger volume, it should display a message. Let's stop playing. And before I get too far ahead, I'm going to create a prefab of our player. I might as well create a prefab of the nav points and the agent manager as well, just so that we have those prefabs created and it's a really simple process, and then anything we want to change on all of the instances we can do from that prefab. So next up, let's add a trigger inside a room, or let's do this first. Let's create a few different rooms. So we have our room self-contained in this room 1. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate room 1, call it room 2. And then I want to make sure to move our room off of our other room so it's not the exact same. And we have 2 different rooms now. A couple of things we're going to need to take into account here. Let's go ahead and just press play. We see that agent got shoved off into room 1, and our other agents aren't moving. If we take a look at our console, just pause that play, not stop showing messages so we can see this. Failed to create agent because it's not close enough to the nav mesh. Well, we just duplicated a whole bunch of level geometry. We need to rebake that nav mesh. So anytime you're changing that level geometry, we see that our nav mesh is only over here. We need to rebake this, and can't bake while you are playing, so you have to stop playing. Bake that so that it does have the ability to go to this next area. Just press play without changing anything in the level. And yes, Richard, you have a hand up?
Does that golden, that yellow line represent separation of each like level?
The yellow line it's showing right here is basically that orange line. It's just behind geometry over here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just representing that same orange line showing the border of what I have selected. If we don't select that,
Turns white.
And that white is just because it's on origin, the edge of the origin there. Yep. And that's with the navigation map showing, just shows the border of that triangle for that area. All right, so we've got our new room. Let's just press play, and let's try and get over to our new room. Well, I can see my character kind of getting into the new room, but I can't really go into that room because we have just a static camera looking straight down. There's a few different camera setups that would be recommended for this, where you have something where you can click around and get our character moving. Very easiest one is just attaching our camera to our player. So if we play now and we click, well, because I didn't start my camera out with a 0 transform. Let's 0 that out. So, oh, not that 0. I do want it up in the air. Just 25. I like even numbers. And 0 for Z. So it is centered right on top of our character.
I don't think 25 is an even number.
It's 5 multiplied by 5, which is a beautiful square.
Fair enough.
25 is my favorite number.
So now we can click around, but as you can see, it can get quite dizzying having that camera turn around, especially if like you're trying to click and your character's navigating around something. That's not a great option. So there are a few solutions to this. As we saw in this sneaky, this person had just set up a collision volume or trigger volumes to tell the camera to switch to a different location and just show the entire room in the game scene at once. So it is a static camera per room. I prefer a dynamic camera so that it does follow along with the player, so we can only see just a certain part of our area around us. But I hate the fact that it's rotating around and things like that. There's a quick fix to this. We can do it a couple of ways where we detach the camera and just update the camera position from our player script, or we can even add a no rotate on our new script to our camera to just ignore rotation. So we'll keep it attached to our player, but we're going to create a new script, scripts folder, C# script, no rotate. And here, what we're going to do is grab our camera rotation straight from our start. So for that, rotations are stored in quaternions. Quaternion start rotation. We'll initialize that to an identity quaternion, which is basically just 0 rotation. Oh. And then in start, we're actually going to ask it, what is your current rotation right when the game starts? So our start rotation equals, well, we'll grab that information from our transform. Then in update, rather than just letting it ignore everything and keep as it is, we want to basically keep it the same as our start rotation. So this, just the exact opposite, where rather than setting our start rotation, we're going to be setting our current rotation to our start transform, or start rotation rather. So just a few lines of code in here. Let's double check this. If we play, we still have rotation because I didn't attach our script. Attach that script. Always remember to save your scripts from Visual Studio and then attach your script in Unity. And we now have the ability to just see the area around us, and we can click and have our character move to those points wherever we clicked. Just as a nicety of feedback and stuff, one thing I'd probably want to do is add a little bit more player feedback about like where I clicked, because as the camera's moving, I clicked right there, but we see it's going to where I first clicked the mouse. My mouse is now over here, and it can be hard to tell exactly where you clicked, things like that. So we're going to create a simple object just so that we can have a prefab spawn at our click locations and see exactly where we clicked. So we'll add a new thing in here. We'll just add straight to our level. And we'll go with, there's not a lot of good options. We'll just go for a simple sphere and change its color so it's not the same as our patrol points. We're going to call this click feedback. We'll go ahead and create a material for it. So in our materials, create a new material. Let's change that up. Let's go for teal color. New material, click. We'll apply that to our object. And then we'll actually spawn this object right where we clicked. A couple of things I want to make sure of. I don't care about any collisions with this object. I do not want a sphere collider on it. I just want this to be a visual feedback in game where I'm clicking. So just a mesh, no collision on it whatsoever. And we'll need to create this as a prefab so we can start spawning this object as needed. I want to put that in the prefab folder, not the materials. So we have this prefab here. And in our player script, I'm going to add a variable for what object it's going to spawn when we click. We'll make it serialized so our editor can change it. It'll just be a simple game object reference, and we'll call it object to spawn. Initialize it to null so we don't get any warning. And when we click, rather than just setting our destination, what we'll also do is instantiate an object. There's a couple of different overloads here. We see 10 different options. We can tell it quite a few different things. One I'm going to mainly look at is takes in a specific object, the one that we're going to spawn or clone. Then we need to tell it where and what rotation. Well, it's a sphere, so I don't really care about the rotation too much, but I do care about that hit point. First thing, our object to spawn will be our object to spawn. Our position will be right at our hit point. And our rotation, well, that can be an identity quaternion or no rotation. Save that.
I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Why is serialized field and not just a public game object?
Because if things don't need to have access to this outside of the script, it's best to just keep it private.
All right.
Just better coding practice so that if anything does reference the player script, there's no reason to see object to spawn unless you really need access to it. If you have like an option drop down and your options could have access to it, but that's getting into pretty deep. For our purposes, for sure, nothing else needs access to this. It's purely local to this script. All right. So our object to spawn, we're going to want to set that on our player. I'm going to do it on the prefab itself. So our player prefab, object to spawn. We want to make note anytime we are assigning anything, whether we're choosing something from our assets, which are going to show our prefabs, or our specific scene. Since we're in a prefab, we just want to assign things from our prefabs, because that's just a basic object template, essentially. We always want all of our players, anytime we place one into the world, to spawn this other prefab for when it clicks. Okay, we'll jump back to our scene. And last thing up, I no longer need one in scene. We just had to create an object. But we have our prefab now that it's going to spawn when we click. Hopefully, if everything's working correctly. When we click, we have a nice little blue dot showing exactly where we clicked. Last thing I'm going to want to do is also destroy our clicks so that we don't pepper our screen with blue dots all over the place. But we'll do that after a certain amount of time, so it shows up, and let's say after 2 seconds, it'll get rid of it. Well, in here, our instantiate actually returns the object, it returns a game object, and that game object will be a reference to the object it spawned. So I could capture the game object return. Game object, we'll call it spawned object. And we can then call functions from that spawned object, affecting it as well instead. We'll go ahead and just destroy this game object. There's 2 overloads to destroy if you didn't know. There's one that just takes the object reference, and then one, come on, bring that back up. There we go. One that takes a float value for time as well. That time is actually a delay. How long before this just actually destroys the object? So let's just pass in, I said 2 seconds. I'll just pass in a 2. And we'll save that. And take a look at how that's working now. So when we click, spawns that object, and we'll keep them on for about 2 seconds until the object times out. And you'll notice as I place these new ones, it just immediately starts moving to the last place we clicked. So our very last thing we want to do is have our character interact with triggers and let it know like when it's in a certain area. Let's say we're going to set up a new trigger object over here in room 2 to be our end goal. All right, let's see, room 2, we'll go ahead and add an object here. Well, let's just do let's create an actual 3D cube for it. We're going to scale this up. Move that towards the edge. One thing about this cube, we'll be setting it as a trigger. So this is our win trigger, or our player exit, something like that. I do want it to be a trigger, so it's not a collider. I want to make sure that my navigation mesh takes this into account. If we bake right now, we see is good. It can walk through it, but just to make sure, we'll go to that object tab. I always want to make it walkable through here. And we'll make it a bit wider as well. All right, when our player touches that, I want it to basically turn on some text on screen showing that we win. So we're going to need to create that win text and create a script to respond when our player enters that, things like that. I'll create our canvas out here, or 2D object text, or UI text rather. UI text, what do we want to name this text? This will be win text. And I'm going to just press F so we can focus on that in the screen. We see our screen is represented by this huge object, huge thing over here. I want this to be center screen. And we can see that showing up over here now. Let's modify some properties on it. You escaped. Exclamation. Let's bump up the font size. Let's go 32. And we need to make sure that our width and height can fit. Is there actually an auto option? No, blueprint mode, raw edit, yeah. Let's say 500 width, 300 height, and we'll center our text into the center of that text box. You escaped, and just leave it as black text for now. Not going to worry about how it looks too much. But I do want this to start the game as it's turned off. I can then get a reference to this object from our win trigger. So our win trigger is right here. Let's add a script and tell that text to turn on for the UI. So we'll go to scripts, creating a new script here. We'll just call it win trigger, keeping similar naming convention. Our win trigger, we'll leave those there. One thing we want to do, yes, Richard.
For the win trigger, not only do we want that text box to appear, but wouldn't we also want to kind of like disable any inputs, or pretty much disable the, not really disable the game, but like in a sense freeze it?
Yeah, we can do that as well. It's not required, but for sure. Let's see. So for this, we'll need a couple of things. We'll need a reference to that win text. We just look for text right here. There is text that did find it inside unityengine.ui. If we hit that, it auto-detected that we needed that using directive. So it looks like it parsed enough to add that for me. Text, win text. And we'll initialize that to null. We want this serialized so we can set it in the editor. All right. Our start, we don't need to do anything. Our update, we don't need to do anything. We only care what happens when our player enters this trigger. So we'll add an on-trigger enter. And we're going to want to check other objects because our nav agents may end up chasing our character into the trigger or just randomly walking through it depending on if we laid out our level incorrectly. But we'd want to make sure that to check what other object is hitting us, not just willy-nilly turn on anytime anything hits. Other, we'll get a component from it, and we'll be looking for that player component. If it has that component, that means our player hit us, and we can then turn our win text or enable our win text. Setting enabled equals to true. And Richard, you had just asked about doing a pause or end. I think there is under game is stopped. Game now. Shoot, I don't remember off the top of my head, but here's where Google comes in. Unity, pause game. Pause key, timescale. Okay, we can do it with a timescale. Not the best way, but there is a pause game. Pause game just sets the timescale to 0. Fantastic. All right. I was hoping for a better interface than that, but we'll just do timescale equals 0 after we've won. So it basically freezes everything in the game. It is very important that if you do have like a menu pop up at the end of the game, if they want to retry, that as they exit the menu, you do not forget to reset this timescale. Otherwise, your game will just lock up when you return to it outside of menus. Alrighty, and let's check this out. That's the wrong one. Press play. And I am gonna focus on the game over here so we can see it. Click, 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 click. Walking by all these guards. Walking in to our mesh over here, we see it is for sure overlapping, but it never showed the win or anything like that. Does anybody have a guess as to why our on trigger enter didn't happen?
Did we have it attached to an game object in the scene, right?
And trigger does not. So that's one issue. It's not the only issue. I was hoping, I think I've done that with every script for this demonstration that I forgot to attach it, but that's not the issue I was trying to point out, but we'll... So it's still not triggering, even though we do have that.
Because we haven't put anything inside there.
If we assign that to our win text, and we are selecting the one from our scene, that's one more issue.
Does our player need a rigid body?
There you go. That was the one I was trying to point out, but apparently blanked on the other 3 problems that we have. So yeah, no message gets sent because our player does have a collider, but colliders don't just send messages to other objects if they don't have a rigid body on them. Anything moving in the game, keep that as a hard rule in mind. If something's going to be moving in the game, it should have a rigid body so that our physics system can process it more efficiently and things like that. So we do need to add a rigid body here. And as far as the stuff we want, well, we don't necessarily want our physics controlling our character because our nav mesh agent should control the character. Let's just set it to is kinematic so that our nav mesh agent can control it more. So now as we hit it, we've hit that. Fantastic. Our wind text did not enable, but our game is actually paused, as we can see. Or our timescale got set to 0. So we did something right, just our wind trigger didn't quite get set. And this text never turned on. So something else is wrong with our script. Let's double check this. So we're debugging now. Yes, I want to enable debugging. And one thing I'm going to do before we play, I'm going to bump up my character speed so it doesn't take quite as long to get there. That's mass. Let's go 15. Get our character moving fast. So we play. We hit that. We are on the breakpoint right now. So it should be turning wind text to enabled. Continue, but I'm not seeing that on here. And it is still not enabled. Fantastic. Oh, we've got to figure out what's going on, why the wind text isn't working there. Let's just do it by our entire canvas instead. Set our canvas off. Might be something weird with the rendering because there are no active things in the canvas when it first loaded. And let's change our wind trigger. Rather than text, we'll work with canvas. And we'll just turn that one enabled. Let's check. There is an enabled. Enabled.
I think you're looking for
Configured.
set active.
Set active and enabled, yeah. Active and enabled. And there we go. So yeah, I guess because it was inactive, it wasn't triggering that. And this is just going to get, no, I guess we will use enabled, but working on the canvas this time. Let's try that. Stop debugging so I can save our script. All right. And as a quick test as well, let's just move our start way closer since we're trying to debug an issue. Get it, and we got unassigned reference because I changed the variable type. Fantastic. Because our player, not our player, wind trigger, needs a reference to the canvas. We are doing it from the scene. And it is pausing. I wonder if it's the set time scale causing a weird issue with that. If there might be a time delay. This is an interesting one. But we'll just get rid of the time delay. And no, it is not turning that on. Canvas, win text. Win text should be enabled as soon as we turn that on. Neat. Well, let's find our win text and then do it that way instead. Untriggered enter. Find object of type. Canvas. Dot enabled equals true. Wonder if there's some weird issue with it referencing the one from the scene instead of finding it during runtime. Yep, null again because could not find object of canvas type. Fantastic. Because it's disabled. Gosh darn it. Text. And let's just do something else here for that. Let's just set our text to invisible. There should be a visibility in here somewhere. New material. Nah, that shouldn't matter. Oh. So the text component is the one that we were modifying. I forgot because the way this is set up. This is what we were turning on or off rather than the whole text from here. So we do want our canvas on, but our text right here is the one that it was enabling. But that didn't help because we had it unchecked here. That makes more sense. So let's undo all this stuff. Bring it back to text. Time scale. All right, so we've got it back to the original way we had our script. And in our editor, what we have now, our canvas is enabled, our win text is enabled, but our actual text component is disabled right now. Then our win trigger, when we're telling it which text component to work with, that's our win text. Might need to do a get text from that. Nope, there we go. So yeah, And there we go. I'm back. Sorry, my headset went to sleep mode. All right. So where did I actually cut out at? One minute ago.
When you had finally figured out you enabled the win text and the canvas, but not the text itself, and you fixed the script so you're about to show the result.
Oh, that I cut out that long ago? Okay. So yeah, the results all working again. We have that all functioning. And it does turn this on versus this one. As far as the other features, please give those a go before Monday so that you have attempted them with just the knowledge you already have for like the reverse state, the angry state, the pursue state. Try and give those a go before Monday. We will be talking a bit more in depth about the pursue state on Monday, showing you a couple of methods of how you can kind of get that switching states based on distance. There's a lot of different ways you can set that up, whether you're using collision volumes or constantly holding a reference to the player and the enemies and just checking your distance every frame or something like that. Give that a go before you get to Monday's lecture and see what you can get working on your own. Other than that, that wraps up for today. Were there any last minute questions before I close out? Nope. Alrighty then. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you again on Monday.